Hey there, tech visionaries. Welcome back to my channel. Today, we are going to dive into essential topic for anyone working with .NET Web API, and that is controller filters. Whether you are a seasoned developer or just starting out, understanding how to effectively use filter can save you time and make your code cleaner and more maintainable. So, be comfortable, and now let's jump into the world of .NET Web API filters. Before we actually start doing something, making our hands dirty, we want to understand what controller filters are. Maybe you know, but let's say for the sake of the newbies, what are controller filters? Controller filters in .NET Web API are powerful features that allow you to inject logic before and after the execution of an action method. So in your controller, you have an action method in it. Now, before the method starts or after it has executed, you can inject a code before or after using the filter. Think of them as a gatekeeper of your API endpoint, handling tasks like login, authentication, and error handling without cluttering your controller actions. So you need not to modify your controller action. All that you need to do here is apply filter. And before the action method starts or after it has finished execution, you can inject logic in there. There are several types of controller filters that we can talk about. We have authorization filter. Now, this filter runs before the action method and are used to determine if the current user is authorized to execute the action or not. So that's for authorization filter. Now we have action filter that can run both before and after the action method. So before the action gets executed and after it has got executed, you can run this filter in between. Aside from that, we have an exception filter. Now this handles exception thrown by the action method. So maybe if you want to handle exception based on a specific action method, you can actually apply filter to that, and it's going to handle that exception to that specific endpoint or an action method. Then lastly, we have a result filter. Now this filter also runs before and after the action results are executed. So the idea for this is to assist you, enable you to modify the response. So maybe when you call an original response based on that specific ID of the client, you want to modify the results based on the identity. So you can actually implement it from this result filter. Okay, and you can apply this to the controller action method. Now, all the filters that we're talking about here can be configured globally and now locally. If I say globally, what do I mean? What I'm trying to mean here is you configure it in the program.cs file, and it can be used all over in your application. So the number of controllers that you have in here, each is going to have a lookup in that filter. So you create just one filter, configure it globally, and all subsequent controllers are going to come. Even the feature ones are going to still use the filter in there. Well, if you want to actually make it limited to a specific endpoint or an action method, that is where the locally also comes in. So you can also configure it based on a specific endpoint. So when you have 3 endpoints, you can create 3 specific filters for each of the endpoint. And now each will get run when that exact filter is being, exact endpoint is being called. So I made mention of 4 types of filters in here, but we're going to have a look on authorization filter and also an action filter. How do you implement these filters in your web API? Let's have a look. From the screen, you can see I have created a project here already, and that is a boilerplate from the Microsoft, and you can see I've done nothing to it as it is. That's a default one. Okay, the name here, it is a demo filters in web API. Now read this, what you're going to do for you to understand this. Let's say we're going to have an endpoint. Now with this endpoint as action method, before a user accesses this endpoint, we want to intercept it. We want to check the context, check if the user is authenticated. If the user is authenticated, then we want to add authentication state as a header key with the value of true, meaning the person here, it is authenticated. So we're going to add that dynamically when we check that current user or that context here has an user authenticated, then we can set that. Now when we get to the controller, this is what we're going to do. We're going to retrieve this header from the context. Then we're going to check the state of this authentication state key. When we check and we see that it is set to true, it tells us that this user here is authenticated. Then we can give the user go ahead to access the content or the resource specified in that endpoint. Okay, so in this we are going to be using the local one and also the global one as well. Aside from that, we talk about the two aspects or two types: authorization filter, and also we're going to use the action filter. So let's get started. Now I have this in here. The first thing to do here is to let's implement our authorization first. Okay, so in order to do that, this is very simple. It comes in the form of an attribute and you can actually apply it in here. For now, I have a default controller created, and that is a weather forecast. So let's say if I'm to create another endpoint, let's have a look on that. I have a simple, that's the most simplest action endpoint ever on this earth. That is it. So here, if I call this endpoint, I am going to retrieve or receive this new data, okay, as a result, as an object result. Good. Now that we have this, if you want to protect these two endpoints, what is the idea, the best way to do that? And I believe for now, you're going to say that, yes, let's implement this authorized attribute in here. And that's great. So by doing this, it tells the client that before he can get access to this endpoint, he must be authorized. That's good. I'm also going to have 401. That's an authorized status code. Great. Now, if I want to also apply to this, then I need to copy this, duplicate this authorized here, and I'll pass it on in here. Isn't it? So to make this endpoint authorized or protected, to also make this endpoint protected. Well, if I don't want to do that, then I can just grab this, can grab one of this, then let me comment this, and now we can protect the whole app. Okay, so that's the whole endpoint, and you need to put it down in here. So to make this authorized, so if I do this, it tells us that the whole controller here, it is authorized. Now before, or it is protected. So before you can have access to any of the methods specified in here, you must be authorized. Is that not so? Great. Now let's assume you have about 10, 5, 7 more numbers of controllers. You need to repeat this authorized keyword, authorized attribute all over in various controllers, isn't it? Yeah, so if you have in mind that you want to protect all your endpoints, all your controllers, then you can use the idea of implementing global authorization. So that's the global filter. You can do the global filter. And now when you do the global filter, you need not to specify the attribute here like what we've done. You can do it in the program.cs file, and all the current controllers and even the future controllers that may come, they are going to be protected by that authorized attribute, okay, or the authorized filter that we have added. For now, let's try to access this and see. Now we are protecting the whole controller. So let's see if I run this, although we have no authentication scheme specified. So if I click on it to call this endpoint, we must have an error, okay? And this error should contain information such as no authentication scheme specified, because yes, of course, there's no scheme specified in here. So when you see that, it tells you that this point or this endpoint here or this action methods are protected or the controller is protected. Let's assume that. Then let's see. So that is it. Now it is ready. So if I click on weather forecast, since all these methods are coming from one controller, that's the weather forecast controller, we're going to have no authentication scheme or specified, and that's great. When I click on the next one too, we have the same thing from here. So you click on this and you have the same thing. And we are getting that because of what we specified down on top of the controller. Now let's assume when you have another controller, and it carries the same thing as this. Let's see. So I'm going to copy this. Let's stop this. Now let's copy this one, and I make a duplicate here. And I'm going to say this is controller or weather forecast 2. And now this weather forecast 2 that we have in here, I think the name should be like this, isn't it? Great. So let's actually add it. So that's the 2 specified in here nicely. Okay, now we want to remove this. Let's also remove this, and now let's also remove this. Now this controller here, it is not protected, so I can click on any endpoint and I'm going to have the data from that endpoint. Okay, so if I want to protect this, it means I have to add the same thing in here. Now the routing here, it is, yes, they have the same. Let's see, let's make some change in here. Maybe this I'm going to do 2. Yes, I think that's giving us the issue. Alright, so now you can see it is ready. Now if I click on this, you see we have weather forecast 2 and then this weather forecast 1. Weather forecast 1 endpoint or the controller is protected. But what of this one? If I click on try this out, this is not protected and I can have access to this. If I want to protect this, unless I do specify the same attribute, authorized attribute on top here or against each of the endpoint. Good. Now there is a way to do that. If I want to protect all the endpoint without specifying this authorized attribute, that is where I need to include a filter. How do you do the filter? You can do that from the program.cs file. So let's go in there, and now we're going to, let's remove this authorized from the controller weather forecast 1. So all the endpoint for now, they are not protected. Now we're going to protect all of them once and for all. So let's see, go to program.cs file, and now where you have these controllers, we can specify some filters in there. So let's say, let's specify an option. So this options max 2, we can have options.add.filters first. So filters.add. Then here, with this add, what are we going to do? We can specify new authorized filter. Do you have it? New authorized filter. Now, when we do this, it tells us that it's going to add this to the controller. So all controllers are going to have an instance of this authorized filter attached to this. Now let's save this. So currently we have 2 endpoints. On the side view of the endpoint, you see they are not protected, but in the filter state, they are. So let's have a look and I'll check it up and see if we're going to have the same no authentication scheme was specified. Okay, you can have that in here, meaning that it has been protected. Now let's see. So click on this and now execute this, and now you can see we have the same thing. So no authentication scheme was specified, and now this is coming from weather forecast 1. Let's see controller 2, and I'm going to click on this too, and you can see we have the same thing. So that is the first way to handle that, to use the filter for global and also the local attribute. So from the local state, you need to use the attribute, and from the global, you need to use the filter. That sounds great, isn't it? Now let's have a look at the next one, that is using the action filter. So action filter contains 2 states. That is when the action is going to be executed or after it has done executing. So we're going to check first. Before the action gets executed, we want to check the state of that current user. Is it authenticated that request? Is it authenticated? If yes, then we're going to allow. But if it is not, then we're going to add a header to that request. And now when it gets to the action endpoint, we're going to retrieve that header and now check the state of it and now return based on the state of that. So we're going to use that as a filter, and we're going to apply that. We can apply it globally to all, or we can apply it to a specific endpoint. Okay, so let's have a look on that. I'm going to minimize this. So maybe we can create, for organization's sake, we can create maybe a folder here now, just pass in filters. Now this filters, we can create maybe check authentication filter. So check auth filter. Let's add a class of that. This name to this. Check auth filter. Now once you have this is what you're going to be doing. We want to allow this, or we can access this through attribute, or we can actually use this as a global state. So in order to use it as a local state, you must convert this as an attribute. And for global state, then you need nothing. All that you need to do here is to configure that in the controller and you're good to go. Okay, so now that we have this, let's see how to go about this. The first thing I need to do here is let's inherit from this. So that's an I-action filter. Now this is limited, or this is related to authorization, so we can inherit from the I-authorization filter. Okay, but this we want to have our starting and our ending. You want to be flexible, so you want to have the whole view of it. So that's the reason why we are using this action filter. Now this is what we're going to do. This has some method that we need to implement, two methods, and that is onExecuted. That is after the action has been, the action or the endpoint has done execution, and also the here is on action executing. So before it executes, this method is going to get called, and after it is done, this also will get called. So this is what we're going to do. First of all, let's get the state. Let's get authentication. Is authentication or authorization state of the current request, and now we're going to do that in the executing. So here we say there is the auth, and we say we get it from the context. This context has a payload coming in, and are we saying that we want to grab the section of what authorization. Now this is going to give us a list. So in that list, we can just check if the count here it is not equal to 0. It just says that there is an authentication header attached to this. Then we can go ahead and now figure this out. But for now, we are not much into that. So this is what you want to do. We want to check in case we have the value or the count here more than 0. It tells you that there's a state in there. Then we want to have a state in here. So this state here is in the form of a boolean, and now we want to set this. The reason why we have this state here is we want to return the state of this into the HTTP response. You know, here there is a request. So request here is what's going to be processed from the client into the system, right? And our response is from our endpoint. After the method has done executing, the response here is from the system to the client. So one coming that is coming inside our system, we have the request and want to grab the authorization header. In case we see that the header count here is not equal to 0, it means we have header. Then let's actually add this. So we want to set the state. So actually we're going to have some logic in here to check if the user is authenticated. But for now, let's use a scenario. Now let's assume in case the header or the authorization header here has more than 0 headers. It tells us that yes, this user is authenticated because actually there's a key append to that. This is a use case scenario that I'm using. Okay, so let's see. Now that when we have that, so we're going to assign this authentication state here as to true. Now there is the key and that is the value. So and we're going to set this state to true because here we are saying that this user coming in or the request coming in here is authenticated or is authorized, so you can give it access. Now in case it does not have any section known as authorization, then set this authentication state to false. So instead of doing this logic in the controller, you decide to put it in the filter form and apply the filter to the controller, making it clean and also maintainable. So here we have the same state in here. Now after the method has been, or after the endpoint has been executed, we want to return to the user or to the client. Now in order to return to the client, this is what you want to do. You want to actually append, or you want to add the state of that user. You want to add it as a header, as a response header. So we're going to say that context.http context.response. So that header, we're going to append authentication state in here. And now since we have the state stored, we can have the state convert into a string. Since it's a string value, we can convert into a string and now return it to the user. Okay. So now that we have this very simple one that we have, the next thing that we're going to do here is we need to register this. How do we do that? Let's copy this authentication filter, and now for global usage, let's put it in here. Instead of this authorized filter, we want to replace this check auth filter in here. Now we're going to run this, and now let's check it out. So in order for us to test and verify this, we can put breakpoint in here. So let's put breakpoint here, and we can also put breakpoint here at the last end. Now let's go to our controller. Now from our controller, we have two controllers. Let's tackle any of them since it's going to be used by any. Now we see yes, we are here. Now this is starting before it's going to end, going to start from that endpoint. So it's going to check here. Now let's see this authorization session. This is the header. Do you have anything? You could see it is null, because when you check this, the context of the request coming in, it has a request type, and now this request has a header type. The header here has 14 count, and now from that you want to locate the authorization header. Now you can see from here the authorization header, we don't have something like that, right? It is null. So in case it is null, then we are going to add our own header and set this to true. Oh, that is to false, because it doesn't have any. So set our own as false. So if I check from the request again, or even from the header again, you can see that from headers we have this header added, authentication state, and this set to false. Good. So now that we have this, what we can do here is we can go to the endpoint and now verify or retrieve this from the filter. But for now, we're going to click on next. Now, after the method has been executed, the state of this is going to be append here. So if I click on the response to from the header, we must have the count of 1, and we see we have the state in here set to false. Good. Now, let's see. From the controller, now we have the data, although we are not authenticated, but we have the data. Now, let's have a look on the next step to do. We go to the controller. And now here, before we get the data from the user, we want to first check and see if the user has the auth state set to true, or if the user has any header known as authentication state, and that header has a value set to true, then we want to return this. Else we can return unauthorized. You see what you're doing? Good. So let's have a look on how to do that. So let's create a simple method down here. Now, since maybe you're going to be using that in this and that, we can put it in here. Okay. Now, from our method that we have in here, we want to get a request coming in from this HTTP context. You want to grab the authentication state, first or default, and now we're going to convert the state here to Boolean, because you know we haven't either true or false. So you want to convert it in here. Now, in order for us to work with this, what we're going to do here is we're going to check if, so let's say if, then we're going to say this is false. In case it is false, and that is check state. So if this is false, then we want to return unauthorized. Okay, so from this endpoint, if it is false, you want to return unauthorized. Before we do that, we need to iaction. Let's make this as iaction results. Okay, now this iaction result, maybe let's have task of this. Now let's make this as okay. Alright, so we are checking in case the state here is set to false. That is, this state is found in the header, and now the state here, it has a value of false. Then you want to return unauthorized. Okay, so we have that for this method. Now let's see how to go about this. Let's rerun this application and now see if this filter will work for us. So let's see, from this first one, I'm going to click on try this out and now get this. So we have it in here. Click on OK. Yes, OK. And now let's see. You can see now we have 401. So you can see the filter is actually working in here. You see that? We have 401. Now let's again see. So let's use Postman and add certain value to the header as authentication. And now let's see what's going to happen. So I have this Postman opening here. Now the endpoint here, it is this. And now we have our weather forecast. Okay. Now you go to our header, and on this header, let's add authorization as a key. And aside from that, we're going to add something like authorize. Authorize. Now, in order to inspect this, click on send, and I see what's going to happen. We have the endpoint hit. Now, if I check here, you can see now we're going to have the value of what authorized. Because when you check this request has header. Now, this headers contain authorization, and the value here is authorized. If so, then it's going to set this authentication state to true. So you can see this is set to true, and if this is set to true, then when you go to the controller in here, it's going to skip this, because here this is saying that if it is false, return, and here it is true. So we're going to skip this, and we're going to have the data in here. Now let's have a look. So if I click on continue on, see what's going to happen. It's going to just add a state to the response, and I click on continue on again. and now we have the data in here, isn't it? Let's go to the controller. So that's our endpoint. Right click on this. Let's go to inspect element, and now in here we're going to navigate to network. Now this network, let's run this again, but before we do that, let's remove this breakpoint. We want to check and see if it has that header value attached to the one that we specified, in case it has that. Now click on execute. We have this 401 because the header is not added. Now you can see from here, when you check this is a response, we have authentication state. It is set to false, isn't it? Now let's go use the postman, and now from here we have this a header. So you can see we have authentication state set to true because we added the authorization section in here. Click on it again, and it's also set to true. Remove this, and now run it, and it's set to false. So you can see that you can just protect, you can filter a certain endpoint both globally or locally using the filter. So using controller filter is very important to filter results and to perform actions before even an endpoint gets executed, and even after. You can do that as well. Now let's have a look on what we did here. It is a global state. Now if I want to make this related to a specific endpoint, what can I do? Now for the global state, all that I need to do here is, here we just have a method to do that. So for each method, I go to the controller. Now from each method, that's what I need to do. So let's say if I want to implement it here, let's say I have my body tag in here, and that is a body, and you're going to return okay. So return okay here. Good. Now all that I need to do here is to copy this line and now just paste it in here, and that is all. So this is also going to get this affected. Now in the next controller, I can also copy this. Maybe I can put it as a service or whatever. Let's see. For controller 2, I can also put this in here. Okay, and now I can do the same thing. So let's go in there, and now let's copy this, only this one, and now let's replace this. So you can see that I am not adding, let's rerun this, I'm not adding any attribute specified in here, but it is still working because I've configured it as a filter in the controller, and all controllers are going to get a bit of it, and they're going to use it and configuring the settings for this. Okay, that's for authorization. Now if I have this, click on that, and I can see I'm going to have the same 401. So you can see I have 401 from this controller 1, controller 2. I'm going to have the same thing as well. Okay, so here we are having the data, right? But it is we use it for this, I'm sure. Yes. So you can see I have the same 401. Now, how do you make it specific or limited to a specific endpoint? Let's see how to configure that. Now, instead of you configuring it as globally, no, we can remove this from the global state. So let me just comment this. And now we're going to add this controller as it was default. So let's add it here. That is the default one. Good. Now that we are done with this, let's go to our endpoint. That's the controller endpoint. And now let's see. So in order to do this, this is weather forecast, controller 1. Let's apply the attribute on top here. So in order to do that, you need to specify service filter. So service filter. Now with this service filter, let's specify the type of. So we have a type of. And on this type of, what is the type of the filter that we created? And we need to specify the name. So here that is check auth filter. So here we are adding it based on this. Okay, so if I click on this, let's rerun this and I'll check this out. So this is coming from the controller 1, and now we are adding it to specific endpoint get data. Let's have a look. So controller 1, so that's the data, this method. Now if I click on this, you can see that we have the same thing. So you see we are having no service type for this being registered. So first is that before we can use the service type, we need to then register this filter itself. So we go to the program, and now we can make a copy of the, okay, we don't have any service here, so let's add one. So that's a builder.services.add. We can add that a scope or singleton. Then let's specify our filter, and that is all. Let's rerun this. So I'm going to go to this data, second one, and I'll click on next, and you can see we have this 401, isn't it? Now if I click on the first one, let's see what we have. You can see we have the same 401, but this 401 here, this point is not hit. Now let's see, let's verify that. We put a breakpoint to our filter that we created. Let's put breakpoint here, and now let's go in there and I'll click on this. So we click on the first one, and now let's see, you can see the breakpoint is not hit. We have the 401 because the state of this, the state that we use is set to false, because when you check the controller one, you can see we are saying that call this method, and now this method also going to get the header from this, okay? And now this header here, there's nothing like that in the header state, so it's going to set to false, and that's what we have in there. But let's see if I click on the next one. So here we have the same thing. Now let's go to this data, click on this, and you can see that we have a breakpoint hit. So it tells you that this endpoint, the filter that we created, is being in use by this specific endpoint. Okay, so this filter here is being used by the endpoint that we have stated on top. Good. So that is a simple way to actually integrate filter, controller filter in your web API. And if I grab this, the endpoint here, let's go to our Postman, let's pass in authorization key. So we have our authorization. Now let's say it is authorized. And I click on send, and you can see that we're going to have the data from the endpoint. The breakpoint is hit. And now let's see, click on continue. And you can see that we have the auth state set to true, and that is when you go to where is the body, here we have the new data from our endpoint. So today we've explored how controller filters can streamline our web API development by centralizing common tasks from authorization to custom logic and so forth. Filters are a versatile tool that every developer should have in their toolkit. So we've also covered different types of filters and how to apply them. That wraps up for today's video. I hope you found this introduction to .NET Web API filters both informative and exciting, isn't it? Good. Filters can drastically improve our API structure and maintainability, so making our life as a developer much easier. If you enjoy watching this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your fellow developers, and subscribe to the channel for more awesome content. Hit the bell icon to stay updated with my latest video as well. Thanks for watching and happy coding!